Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the WhoFlung Gaming Podcast, where I'm joined by a fantastically special guest, my dad, of all people. Most of you guys know me as WhoFlung Gaming or WhoFlung or some variation therein, but he has known me my entire life as David. So welcome to the show. Say hello to everybody.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me onto your program.
Yeah, so I thought, as I was kicking off this podcast idea, I was like, the number one name that popped into my head right out of the gate was you. Because, to some degree, they have met Mumsy. She was, I think, on a stream for all of about 5 seconds, but she was there. And I was like, what interesting aspect of my gaming life/career have they never heard from? And that was immediately where you popped into the picture. Just, I guess, start out with telling the people a little bit about yourself, give them a little bit of back history, because obviously I know you, and I'm sure they would love, before we get into the gaming side of things, a little bit about yourself.
Certainly. Well, I was born in Canada, and that's because, although I'm English, my parents were there temporarily. My father, a medical researcher specializing in neuroscience, had a 1-year postdoctorate research program in Canada. So they moved over there, and while he was working in a hospital in Saskatchewan, I appeared on the scene. And so, although I'm English, I've got this oddity of having been born in Canada. So we soon eventually went back to the UK, where I was schooled all the way through, including university, all the way up to college. I went to, when I was between 13 and 18 years old, I went to rugby school. And people probably have heard of the rugby football game. Well, indeed, that is where the game was invented in the early 19th century. Rugby football, soccer existed before, and people were kicking a ball around on the ground, but some bright individual decided to pick up the ball and run with it instead of kicking it, and that was the beginning of rugby football. And of course, rugby football evolved into different types of football, of which American football is one strand. So you can trace American football all the way back to a town in the Midlands in England called Rugby, which has a school. So I was there, and then after rugby, I went to university in London. And then while I was at university, my parents again were back in North America, in the United States this time. So when I finished college, I joined them in the United States and have been pretty much there ever since. I married your mother, as you know, in 1982. I went back to the UK, collected an English girl and brought her over to America. And so that's just my background in very brief cap there.
Yeah. So as you were mentioning that, I thought about two things that popped into my head. The first one being that most people are probably going to hear me in a tone that they've never heard me before, because although I don't notice it when it happens, I've been told numerous times that when I speak to family members, my accent changes. And I don't notice that happen, but I'm sure somebody will mention at some point, oh, you sound very English today. And that's, why, is because I'm speaking to you guys. And I've heard that happen. And there was another celebrity that a European, or a guy that became famous in Europe, that mentioned it. And he's very North American sounding. He's an actor. And but he's originally from Glasgow. And when he speaks to his family, he immediately changes into a Glaswegian accent. And, all the North American people are like, what is this? We can't understand half of what you're saying anymore. Because, anybody that's ever heard a Glaswegian speak knows that they have a very thick Scots accent. And then the other thing that popped into my head was, thinking about you being born in Canada, going back to the fact that I think we've got to go to Nan, which would be mummy's mother to find somebody that was in our family that was actually born in the UK.
Yes, it gets quite complicated, David. First of all, about the accent thing, we always, while we were living in America, we always joked that we spoke English at home and American outside the home.
Yeah.
And that's true. My accent, it may sound quite English to your listeners, but in fact, when I talk back here in New York, people pick up that it's not local and it's not really true English. It's somewhere in between. They call it North Atlantic accent. It's somewhere in between North America and the UK, and recognized among people that have lived in both places, particularly, as you mentioned, celebrities and movie people who work in the States and come back and spend time in the UK. So that's that.
Yeah, that's the experience that I've had as well. You know, here everybody just says that sounds English, or a European accent. But when I go back to the UK, and granted, I don't think I've been there for probably 4 or 5 years now. When I go back, I spent my entire childhood here being called the Brit as a nickname. And, I go back there and I get called the American. Because although, to a lot of people I sound English, to them I don't. I sound something similar.
The accents are different, and also the usage of some words are different too. The standard in America, the front of the car is called the hood, and in England it's called the bonnet. And so there's those funny sort of little things.
I still say y'all.
Yes, that's a useful phrase. Yeah. Includes everybody. And then the other point you raised about who in our family was actually born in England. So you're right. I was born in Canada. Your mother was born in Kenya because her father was in the British forces and was stationed in Kenya. My father, your grandfather, was born in India, again because his father was an administrator in India. And in fact, he was also, this is your great-grandfather, was also born in India. So it goes back. And so it does sort of...
It shows the diversity of where everybody's from.
Yes.
The one that always gets them is when I tell them that my mother was born in Kenya. That always gets a few looks on my end. And I can tell them, fun stories of going through like customs or something in the Atlanta airport, and everybody looks at her passport and then looks at her and says, wait a minute, this doesn't add up quite right. It's never been an issue, but it just, you can, every now and then you can say that look, they're like, this doesn't, sort of compute. But that brings me,
just one other thing before you change the subject.
Sure.
Just to assure your listeners, I am an American citizen as well. I wanted to belong to the community over there. I didn't want to just visit. So I did the proper route, and I'm a signed up member of the society there too. So,
but that is actually another, talking nationalities, brings me and Victoria into the picture a little bit in that regards, is that we are both, very fortunate to have been born in the States. Because I face that question a lot as to, which country I prefer, and that sort of thing. And I said it's an unfair question to ask, because I'm raised English, so I consider England home, but I wouldn't be anywhere close to where I am in life without the opportunities that I've had in the States. That's just, it's just fact. You go and you can't understand that opinion until you reach the maturity level of an adult and you go back and you experience both. Because, I look at it in hindsight and look at the opportunities that I've had here. And in the UK, they're not comparable to younger people.
That's right.
In the States, I can literally seize anything I want, run with it as long as you put the effort into it. That's a golden opportunity. Whereas in the UK, for younger people, it's a lot harder to compete and survive. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just a lot harder, So me becoming a gamer, not saying that again that wouldn't have been possible in the UK. It would have just been a lot tougher road to get there. Whereas here is whatever you want, as long as the effort and opportunity is there, you can seize it. Which is always my answer to the question. I feel English at home because that's how I was raised, but eternally grateful for the opportunities that I've had here, because it's allowed me to become who I am. What is the first game you remember me playing? Because I think we're going to have two different answers to this.
Okay. The first game was, probably you're right, different answers. I think it was one of the Legend of Zelda games, the Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, that was definitely, I think, probably the first one that we played together. My answer to that would have been, I have, granted, faint memories, but in the UK we had a Game Boy. And that's the first, like, I don't want to call it a console because it wasn't a console in the traditional sense like you think an Xbox or a PlayStation. I don't remember how we got it. I only remember, I think, one Spider-Man game for it. And I'm sure we had, I think, at least one other, like Tetris, I think we had. But I distinctly remember that, and that is my first initial memories of having any sort of video game.
So how old were you at that time?
I think, well, we came to the States when I was 8, I think, second grade, so 8-9 years old. This memory is probably from 4 or 5 years old. It's one of my earlier memories to begin with, period. But certainly what I remember as being my first gaming memory. But that's not like the aha moment of, I'm going to be a gamer. It's just my first memory of it. The first ones that we played together was definitely Zelda. I think absolutely was the Ocarina of Time, and I've told in the past of having the guidebooks, and we couldn't look at the guidebooks until we had at least, wasted an hour trying to solve whatever the problem was.
Right, yes, I remember that. It's that was around 1998, I think. That's when it came out.
Yeah, because it was we got the Nintendo 64 was the platform that we played it on. The first game on that was that I owned was the GoldenEye, the 007 James Bond. Because I remember I got that because I think I got it for Christmas or something one year. And 007, I remember that game, scaring the Jesus out of me at some point. It was something to do with, gas containers and having to sneak in there as a secret agent and blow them up or something. And that absolutely scared the daylights out of me. And I think I put it down for a while after that. And that's when we got into like Zelda and FIFA 98. So yeah, you're about spot on with that time frame.
Well, I think you chose the Zelda game, I think, and just introduced. You said, "Hey, Dad, how about trying this?"
Okay.
It wasn't me going to the store and knowing all about it. It was you knowing about it and introducing me to it. So that's my memory. I mean,
okay.
You may have it.
I don't remember how we got it. I just remember playing it. So I thought that's interesting to again get your side of it, because I think you said we had that in about 98 is
well, that's when Zelda came out. I looked it up. So
yeah,
released in the US in November 98. So we came back in 96 you were here in 96, so a couple of years after being.
That sounds right, because I'm remembering us playing FIFA 98 together, and so that would have been obviously the time frame that we did that. I remember going down the local shopping mall here to an almost now defunct gaming store. What is that called? I'm going to think of it in a minute. It's going to pop into my head. GameStop. There we go. Which is that. I mean, as you and I both know, that shopping mall is all but defunct now. But there are still a few GameStop locations out there at the moment. A lot of it's moving online, and we'll probably hit on that at some point. But I remember walking through that shopping mall, and we picked up FIFA 98 together, and I lost a lot of the games because I would just slide tackle everybody and get half of my team sent off in red cards, and whatever the maximum number of red cards before you automatically forfeit a match is, I hit that almost every time because I'm just a young kid just mashing the buttons. I would love another crack at that now, but.
So, David, were there two types of game in those days? Was it the Zelda game, which was problem solving and exploring, and then there was the FIFA type games where you're actually playing a sport or doing something?
For us, there definitely was. There was two styles of games. I would say there was still a third style, which would have been probably the action style games, which I wasn't into until, obviously I had the James Bond one, which would have definitely fit into that category. But action gaming didn't really come into the fold for me until much later on. So for us, there was definitely sports, which would have covered FIFA and things like that, and then the Zelda, which would have been action adventure, I guess would have been maybe the technical category, but definitely puzzle solving and things. And we had the like I mentioned, the magazines that we had the answers to, in case we got impossibly stuck for us to, figure out. But I remember hours on a Saturday afternoon, we're going at whatever puzzle it is, shooting it with an arrow or, throwing a fish at it or whatever it was that, we did, that was, trying to solve it.
Yeah, that's my memory. And then I'd never followed it up. I know there was other Zelda series and things, but I enjoyed playing it. But I guess other things were happening.
Yeah, I don't think I ever played another Zelda game after that.
No.
That was it. That was the extent of my Zelda career, was Ocarina of Time, because shortly after Nintendo 64, I think my next console after that was either a PlayStation 2 or an Xbox. So I'm not sure of those two which one came first, but I know that whenever the Xbox entered the picture, which is what leads me to believe that the PlayStation might have come first, once the Xbox entered the picture, that was the rabbit hole that I went down as far as consoles go. It went from Xbox to Xbox 360, Xbox One. I've got, you can't see it, because unfortunately you can't see my video, but I'm holding here my Xbox Series X, which is the current generation variant of the Xbox, which, because I'm now a PC gamer, I've turned on maybe twice. It's one of those things. I had a PlayStation 5 when they first came out, probably 2 or 3 years ago. Turned it on a grand total of probably 5 times. I jokingly call it the most expensive copy of Call of Duty I've ever bought, because it cost me about $800 odd to get the console off of eBay, and then I ended up selling it.
Well, David, do you think you're typical of other players? Are people migrating off consoles and online?
We're like going from consoles to PCs.
PCs. Sorry, I mean PCs.
No, not necessarily. All your content creators will be on PCs, just because of the diversity of the software that's available to us to capture it, edit it, stuff like that. Even if I were to play my Xbox now, I would route it through the capture card on my computer so that I can capture the video that I'm playing. So I wouldn't play it in the traditional sense of on a TV. I would play it through the capture card, and that would project onto the monitor on my computer, and I would record it and, do whatever, I'm doing. And literally the only game that I have for this Series X is MLB's The Show, so Major League Baseball game, is the only game that I have on there, simply because it's not available on PC. And baseball is a part of the community that we have here. We chat about baseball while I'm playing, whatever it is I'm playing. People will pop in and say, oh, saw the Yankees lost today, or, what did you think of the Padres win? And because of that, I had to stay quite in tune with a large variety of MLB teams. But no, I would argue that there's still a very healthy, in my opinion, a very healthy, diversity between PC and console gamers, unless you are talking about the niche of content creators, and then that is going to be almost exclusively PC, probably 99% PC. So I'm just pulling up my notes here. The first game you remember me playing is Zelda, and I remembered playing Spider-Man on the Game Boy. So does that mean that the Nintendo 64 for you was the first console that you remember me owning?
Yeah.
And then going down that sort of pathway was for me it was the Game Boy. And again, I don't know how we got that. I just have memories of having it. Going from that to the Nintendo 64, then I think the PlayStation 2, then I think it was the Xbox 360, the Xbox One, Series X, the whole plethora of Xbox things. What was the game that if you can pinpoint one where you thought, all right, I've definitely got a gamer on my hands?
Yeah, that's interesting. The whole issue of
because that's sort of going to lead into the next topic I have of what it's like being the last generation essentially that grew up exclusively outside versus mine,
and then raising
essentially a gamer, and you're being in uncharted territories there.
Well, let's again give your audience a little bit of history of my experience of technology. So. And entertainment technology in particular. One of the things I remember was in around 1968 in the UK, television was the only at-home entertainment, apart from record players and things like that. And in England, in 1968. I only remember there being 3 or maybe 4 television channels.
Okay.
So
is that what I'm remembering, like the traditional like BBC 1, 2, and 3, or was it a little bit different than that?
It was BBC 1, BBC 2, which were the 2 state-owned, and still are state-owned channels. So that meant they were totally ad-free. You'd watch programs without any interruptions because the funding of those channels was provided by the government, so they didn't have to go out to advertisers and raise money themselves. But there were at least 1 or 2. There was 2 commercial channels, ITV, which did have advertisements because they had no state funding. So at most in 1968, when I was a youngish teenager, mid-teenager, there were only 4 TV channels. And the other important point was they only started broadcasting at about 5 in the afternoon. There wasn't all-day TV.
Yeah.
For the whole day. There was a little bit of maybe an occasional broadcast of a sporting event, a cricket match or something, or
but it was very much so scheduled at that point.
Yes, it was very, very scanty too. So I remember they had what was called a test card on the screen, which was a sort of a card that covered shapes and colors. They used to test the setup of the cameras with, and they just left that on. And so if you turned the TV on at mid-afternoon, all you got was the test card. So that's the first thing. There was very limited choice of channels. There was very limited hours of viewing. And then again, and the third aspect is that programs for children or youngsters was again very limited. There would only be an hour perhaps between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the afternoon when children programming took place, and then there would be the news, and after that you would have more adult programming. So that was primitive technology. And then the other interesting aspect, historical point, was I picked out 1968 because that was the time I remember we first got a color television. And I think it was pretty early. I don't think the BBC Two, I think, started colour television in '66, and BBC One in '69. But the memory was the 1968 Olympics.
Right.
A lot of people went out and bought colour TVs, which were just becoming available
To watch the
so
Olympics.
they could watch the Olympics in colour. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's quite a milestone to be around for, essentially. I mean, it's also dating yourself a little bit, but being around for essentially the start of colour TV in the UK and remembering
That's
it.
right.
Yeah.
And in fact, the UK was the first country in Europe to broadcast colour TV. So it wasn't that the UK was behind the times. It was actually
Cutting
leading
edge.
the times in Europe. Yeah.
Yeah. Cutting edge.
So your audience can, a little bit of homework, they can look up when colour TV was first broadcast in the United States.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to Google. Seeing what that time frame would have been, seeing how it compares to the rest of the world. I know I'm certainly going to Google it.
Sorry, it was all broadcast TV. It was rabbit ears stuff, no cable or anything.
Yeah, like that. I'm not young enough to not remember the having to have the antennas on the TV. I remember the first TV we bought when we came to America. The tiny little square thing. I remember that, and pleasantly discovering. I don't know. This is just my memory of it. Pleasantly discovering that the house that we lived in had cable TV. Had no idea that anything like this existed. I thought it was going to be, the rabbit ear kind of deal again. And, I was like, what is this Marvel thing of just plugging a wire into the back of it and voila, it works.
Well, David, this is also addressing what is it like to raise the next generation. You were a bit unfortunate, you and Victoria, your sister, because we weren't big TV viewers when we first arrived here. And part of that was due to the endless TV advertisements breaking up the programs all the time, which we found very tiring. In fact, I very clearly remember the first soccer games that I saw broadcast over here were broken up every 10 minutes for commercial, irrespective of what was happening on the soccer field. So you would have the centre forward racing down the field and just about to slam a ball, and then they would cut for a commercial, and then they would come back and say, this is how they scored. So, now where they have the advertisements on screen during the action is totally different to when it was first broadcast, where they would cut it up all the time. And that happened to all the programs. So when we were coming from a background where we had only limited access to TV because of limited broadcast times and limited channels, we weren't very big TV watchers, and also we were quite selective. The TV programs, everybody has their own favorite programs.
Sure.
And we liked particular programs that were no longer available to us because of our move to the US. So we, for a long time, didn't have a television at all. And you guys, youngsters, had to go out into the yard and play or find something else to do. There wasn't any moral stance or wasn't any sort of position. We weren't interested in it, so we didn't have it. But I remember you coming home from school one day and saying, look, Daddy, we've got to have a television because people at school are talking about stuff they've seen on it. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that particular memory, but it sounds like something I would say for sure.
So you would come back and say they're all talking about whatever the program was.
Yeah.
You were the only people, you and Victoria were the only people in the entire school that hadn't seen it. So,
yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, I have certainly memories of, and this will show the differences in parental controls, I guess, growing up. Varying households from one. Like, I'd hear a group of people talk about one show, and another group of people would be like, we haven't seen that show. We're not allowed to watch whatever it is. And, the one that's popping into mind, you might recognize the name as South Park. And I remember that in elementary school, and I don't think I watched South Park until I was late in my teens. But when I did watch it, I was like, yeah, there's a darn good reason why we didn't watch this growing up. It would not have been something that we just simply wouldn't have watched. But I would argue that you were talking about the not really being a big TV household because of the commercials or things like that. I think that actually benefited. I think that was a good thing because I remember us having movie nights. Friday or Saturday night movie nights, and that exposed us as children to a era of film and television that we might not have been ordinarily exposed to. Like, I grew up watching things like the Marx Brothers, and things like that, and the marvelous television that is. Absolutely hilarious stuff. Now, had we been modern TV people, I might never have watched, Night at the Opera or Duck Soup or Day at the Races, and grown up a fan of that. So, I would argue that it actually was a benefit, because it has created a broader diversity of my, interests when it comes to that sort of thing.
Well, hopefully what we were trying to teach perhaps was selectivity, to choose what we wanted to watch because it was good, rather than just watch it because it's on television. So we didn't have TV at home, but we did go out and rent VHS tapes to start with, and then disc later on. Very regularly from those stores that again no longer exist because people don't do that.
Well, to be fair, I think there is one Blockbuster left in Alaska.
Well, there's one left. It's an Airbnb or something.
Yeah, exactly. And the movie racks are a part of the experience now. But what was, so going back to the original question, what was, if you can remember, a game that you thought, all right, I've got a gamer on my hands, or a moment? It doesn't necessarily have to be a game, but a moment where you're like, okay, or maybe not at the time you knew it was a gamer, but you knew almost you were in trouble at that point.
Well, I can't name the exact game. I'm not sure if it was an early version of World of Warcraft or something. But
because I have a game in mind to answer that question. It was not World of Warcraft, actually, but that obviously was a massive, part of my gaming career for a long time.
To go to sort of how did we manage? What was it? How did we manage it? I don't think I paid much attention to actually what the game was, but I was paying attention to the activity. And this is a time which was completely new and growing. Gaming was new and growing. And I was coming, your mother and I were coming from the place where we wanted you and Victoria to do well at school, to pay attention to your schooling. And we didn't see game playing as a relaxation from schooling, which it might have been. We saw it more as a threat for competing for your time. When your time, we felt, should be devoted to homework and those sorts of things, rather than gaming. So, and it may not have been the case. It may have been that, but I think we were trying to restrict time you spent gaming because of those reasons. And so it wasn't that I was sitting back saying, oh gosh, he's playing Grand Auto Theft or something. And not so much, and just thinking he's spending a lot of time in his room and not so much time producing, homework.
Traditional results in like homework and category and stuff like that.
Traditional results in school or whatever. I mean, they weren't. So, and this was again against a background of research not really telling you having decided how good or bad gaming was for the brain.
Exactly. It was uncharted territory in all aspects of life, for sure. So
that was a sort of a concern, and that's why we were, I think, pretty much on the strict side as we could be when we had influence over you. And then when we no longer had such influence over you, we kind of sat back and crossed our fingers and hoped things would go well. So
I think dancing that line, in hindsight, you guys did a darn decent job of it. It might have been a tough road to travel at that time for all parties involved, but it definitely benefited me in the long run. And I can wrap that into what I do now. Telling me I've got to focus on school or other aspects of life. It doesn't necessarily have to just be school per se. Is something that I live by now. You know, I would say that I am semi-professional. I'm not professional because it's not my, 9-to-5 job. It's not my full-time job. You know, and that has roots in the fact of don't put all your eggs in one basket. You know, you can't do that. And that's a lesson that I've learned and looked back on and learned from then. You know, I take my gaming seriously. I take the content that I deliver to my viewers seriously, and in this case, listeners seriously. But you also, and this would be advice to somebody that wants to get into this, make sure you take time for yourself. And that's a lesson that I've learned from that upbringing, is take time to do other things. You know, make sure you've got at least a week. If this is your 9-to-5 job or your full-time into gaming, make sure you take a weekend every week. It doesn't have to be the same 2 days, but take a weekend. Take at least 2 days a week to, go outside and see sunlight. Because that's the old joke, is that gamers don't see sunlight. Make sure you go outside and you do that, or you do something else. Don't forget the other things in life that are important. Social life. If you've got a significant other, make sure that they're priority as well. They don't have to be the sole priority, but they have to be a priority, and they would appreciate that. And that's what I learned from the upbringing that I got. In the way that I got it, was make sure that there are other priorities in life and don't ignore them. So at the time it was don't ignore schooling, don't ignore, that sort of stuff. But that lesson carried on into, what makes life now very important. I can't, solely go down the rabbit hole of gaming. I have to remember that I have a 9-to-5 job. I've got people that are dependent on me at my 9-to-5 job, which, people don't know what I do for a living for a reason. Right, I keep that part. I keep my private life private. They know that obviously that I have a 9-to-5 job, but those people depend on me, and they depend on my full attention when I go to that. So I can't be constantly in my phone, picking it up, looking at it, thinking, oh, what does this tweet say, or what does that Instagram post say? I have to compartmentalize, and that is something that I wasn't necessarily good at the time. But something I've definitely, because of that, have learned how to do, I would argue, quite well.
Well, that's an interesting point. The fact that it's a long-lasting effect. We're, as parents, struggling, it seems like day to day, to manage and to guide and to advise the youngster. And it's rewarding to see that actually it's not just that week that's being managed. It's years down the road that's being...
Absolutely has a lasting effect, and in a very positive way. It's allowed me to do everything that I've done in life. It's one of the many, many lessons that I've learned. But the aha moment for me, when I was like, all right, I'm gonna be a gamer, or games are part of my life, whatever, was funnily enough a Grand Theft Auto game. You hit on that a second ago. It was Grand Theft Auto 3. Which is probably, 25 odd years ago. We'd have to Google it exactly when it came out. But I remember sitting down playing that. That was the first open world experience sort of game that I had, was that. And that was, looking back on it, that was my I'm a gamer moment. Was playing that. And that obviously branched out into World of Warcraft and things like that, which I think I played World of Warcraft probably starting in high school. I think early phases of high school, freshman, sophomore in high school, up until probably I'm 35 now, probably until I was 30, 31. So you're thinking 15, 16, 17 years.
Was that the one you had the monthly card?
Yeah.
That you paid?
Yeah, that was
I remember that being a concern, because again, not knowing the details, but always worried about or concerned about money management.
Yeah. That was a
seeing
lesson.
The danger of,
that was the first subscription fee that I encountered in my life. Was that? Yeah, because it was, and I think still is, if you go the base month to month amount, because they have month to month, you can do something like a 6-month package or a year pass. It's cheaper, the higher up you go, the initial batch of money that you give them essentially is cheaper. But I think if you just go the standard month to month, it is still $15 a month, which was the first subscription fee that I encountered. I remember going down to the GameStop and buying my monthly pass, in order to be allowed to access the game for a month. Which could, looking back on it, it wasn't really for me, but maybe somebody could interpret that as learning to manage finances or something. Which is not the lesson
well,
I
the fear is that
it.
you could overdo it, and I guess
sure.
maybe that wasn't the case, but you can get sucked into more and more of that.
Yeah,
so
I think that's a danger in
finances.
gaming now, for sure. In the younger crowd, they encounter a game that you've got to initially you've got to pay $15 a month to play it. Now you can give them $10 extra to get this feature, or $15 extra to get this feature, and before you know it, you've dumped $1,000 down a game. Right, so that's why as a gamer, I can't stand what they call pay to win games, which is exactly what we're hitting on. I don't like the culture of, all right, the game costs $10. Now you've got to, in order to unlock this feature, you've got to pay $5. To get this pass, this season pass, you've got to pay $15. To get this access, so it's all stuff that you could do with time invested, but it would take you hypothetically a decade to do it. Right, whereas just give us $10 and you can have it now, and before you know it, you've pumped $1,000 down this game. There's stories that come out in the news all the time. Parents wake up, find out 10-year-old has spent $1,000 on Fortnite points or whatever it is. Horror stories that come out like this because the kid doesn't know what they're doing. They're just mashing the button, pay this, boom, all right, whatever. They're not understanding the money management aspect of it, and the parents wake up to the horror credit card bill. It's $1,000, $2,000 worth of whatever the hell these points are. So I actually don't like, and I never played those games.
Well, thank goodness we didn't have to battle that.
Yeah.
At that time.
I think financially, you guys also, that's another area of success. You could put a feather in your cap there. Is I would have probably never done that anyways. I had a conscience growing up. I had a conscience growing up, and I wouldn't have done that anyways. I would have certainly, I would have asked, and it would have been denied, and we'd have moved on from it, and I'd have gone outside and kicked a soccer ball, or whatever it may have been. Which I enjoy the fact that I consider myself sort of the hybrid generation. I did go outside and play. I did have that, and I'm eternally grateful for that, because right now, I mean, for those that watch the video version of this, that watch my live streams, they see the inside of my studio. It is, at the time of recording this, it is 9 o'clock in the morning Central Time, right? It should be daylight outside. It is daylight outside. But my gaming studio is dark with the backlights on and, that sort of presentation. And other than the small bit of sunlight you can see on the floor, you wouldn't know that it's daylight outside. I'm very glad to say that I know what that's like. I've been outside, I've played, and that is something that has, again, carried on in life. Because, I call you all the time and I say, hey, I'm on my way to the local watering hole. And that is me taking time to go outside, experience life, enjoy the other things. I love travel. I love, food and, beverage culture and that sort of stuff. And so it's a lesson that has carried on. Go outside, and has drastically enhanced my life because of that. So,
David, the other thing we touched on, which haven't quite finished, was back when all this was starting, the parents were worrying about the effect on children's thinking and mind and brains and that kind of stuff. Well, the evidence is actually quite favorable. It's banished fears. Gaming has been shown to be good for learning problems, or the problem-solving type games. I don't know how blanket it is. Had a positive effect.
Yeah.
Training people to not pay your $10 and get your instant answer, but if you make the effort to
You can get your
try
answer.
and
Yeah.
solve the puzzle.
Yeah.
So that's all being put to bed. The trouble is that the kind of problem-solving training that provides sometimes doesn't match up with what the job market requires.
Yeah.
Now, I think probably increasingly jobs are requiring those kinds of skills. I don't know whether it's like flying drones, and so wherever it
Sure.
is, you have learned how to work a console, so you can do other things rather than game. But that's I think merging the
Yeah.
skills that have been picked up in gaming are becoming more applicable to requirements in the job market. So where initially there was a big gap between the two, and you were wondering, if you spend all time gaming, will you ever get a job? Basically,
Yeah.
that's not so much of a fear now.
It's bringing to mind an article that I probably read 5-10 years ago, something like that, certainly during my World of Warcraft career, and it was an article that came out about a guy that in World of Warcraft, there's this thing called guilds, or clans, groups, whatever you want to call them. They're called guilds in World of Warcraft, and raiding is a thing where you've got to organize 40 plus people to take down a boss. This was the original raiding experience. It's now been dumbed down quite a lot because it's proven to be very hard to get 40 people together to take down one boss. But that was initially the big raiding experience. You had to get 40 people on at a certain time, certain day of the week, that sort of stuff. So whenever I said, Mom and Dad, I'm raiding, go away, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
You remember those, yeah. So
I got 35. I need 5 more.
Exactly, So this news article came out about a guy that was applying for a job, and he put guild leader as one of his past work experiences, World of Warcraft guild leader. And he argued very successfully. I think he ended up getting the job, but he argued why that should have been on his resume. And he said, he was I'm just spitballing it, but I imagine he was roughly my age group now, not then, but now, mid-30s, saying, this is not a job, but this is a skill. I got 40 plus people together 2 to 3 days a week, certain time, certain place. We were all organized. People had their roles, their, duties, responsibilities. And I did this week in, week out for years. It shows my ability to organize and, do all that sort of stuff. And I would say, yes, that was certainly my first memories of gaming and reality crossing over into each other.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I apply that today. I would argue that I am very good at on-the-spot problem solving because of that.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Maybe not World of Warcraft. I never led a guild in World of Warcraft. I certainly participated in them in order to experience the content. But my ability, I don't worry about the chaos at the 9 to 5 because I'm like, I've done this before. This is easy.
Plus, recruiters nowadays probably know exactly what that means. Well, a recruiter before, if he said you're a guild leader, he'd say, "What on earth is that?"
Exactly, and then you go down the rabbit hole of it's a video game, and they're like, "Oh, great, here we go again." Now they can relate to that.
Yeah.
It makes it easier. So we're gonna have a quick break as we reset the recording software that we're using, and we will be right back. All right, we're back after our break and just jumping right back into it. We're using Google Meets to record this, so we have to stop and reset it. Anyways, but we were about to go down the rabbit hole of what do you think of streaming and gaming now, because I remember our first encounter as to online gaming was playing Diablo 2, and we talked a little bit about this when we were planning out what we were going to do and sort of the layout. And I remember having the conversation, we would look and you'd be like, you'd ask how many people are online now playing this, and I would say it's like 500,000 to what the gaming world is now, which I think at its height World of Warcraft certainly had 10 plus million active people playing it across all servers, countries, stuff like that. It had north of 10 million active monthly subscriptions. It's not that now by any stretch of the imagination. It's probably a handful of that but it's still going at a level that is obviously beneficial for the company to maintain it and keep releasing content. But what do you think of what gaming has become as a whole?
Well, I'm pretty impressed. It's a huge business.
Yeah.
It's what people spend on gaming last year was 5 times what they spent on going to the movies.
Yeah.
5 times more. So, and then what people have spent, I've been doing a little bit of research on these numbers. What people have spent last year on gaming is 70% more than what they've been spending on movie streaming. So your Netflix and your, Prime, Amazon Primes,
pales in comparison.
So it's a huge business, and it's actually almost as big as cable TV now. And you can imagine the prevalence of cable TV all the way across the country,
right? Yeah,
across all age groups. So that's the first point. What was, when you started, a sort of inevitably a little niche area of specialized entertainment for young people, mostly. Yeah. It has now, there's more 30 and 40 people in your age group, more. Yeah. I guess you've just grown up with it, but
it's like you can see the shift in time, as me being sort of part of the front line of it is moving across the time scale of life. You're seeing it become more and more prevalent in all age groups, as we get older, because I am inevitably getting older. So you're seeing sort of gaming become more popularized and have a wider audience simply because we grew up with it.
It's a wider audience. It's a bigger economic impact and a bigger business impact ultimately on media companies. I read an article in preparation for this where the journalist was teasing the reader. They said Warner's latest title, Hogwarts Legacy, and they didn't say what kind of thing it was, grossed $850 million in its first 2 weeks. That was like the second biggest gross so far. And then they went on to say that Hogwarts Legacy was a game, not a movie. And so they were leading the readers thinking it was a movie, and it was just
and that's a video game. Because I have a comparable stat. I just quickly Googled Call of Duty revenue for 2022. So Call of Duty is a first-person shooter, style of game, and in its first 3 days, so it's a title that a franchise that releases a title annually. So there's Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 came out last year. It was sort of like a remastered remake, sort of an original one, but totally different game, just used the same name. In its first 3 days of release, it did $800 million in revenue, and in its first 10 days, it topped $1 billion.
Goodness, in 10 days.
In 10 days, I don't know a single movie in history that has done that. There have certainly been billion-dollar titles in the movie industry. Avatar is one that pops into mind. There's certainly been titles that cost $1 billion to film. Borderline. Well, I say that because I have read loose stuff, so I want to put big notice by that, saying I've read loose stuff that it took close to $1 billion to film and produce Avatar 2. But to think of a video game that is an annual release title, doing $800 million plus in 3 days and $1 billion within 10 is something that no movie has ever done. Ever. Not even remotely close. Which just shows the money spent on gaming. So for that, and to show that it's not just that niche of gaming is what's interesting, is that's a first-person shooter, which is not everybody's cup of tea. Show that there's games like the Hogwarts Legacy that do the same figures in a totally different genre of gaming. Just shows the weight that's behind gaming now.
That's right. It's making the movie industry sit up and pay attention.
To it. And I think we talked loosely prior to recording this that we're going to see a shift in movies because of that. You mentioned something about the comic book universe, if you can remember.
Yeah, well, people are getting tired of the superhero movies. There's been enough of those Superman, and so they're changing. The studios are beginning to produce game-based movies rather than comic book ones. So that's another development as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely see that. You're starting to see, and my first instances of this was the Halo series. Starting to see when the games are coming out, seeing live action trailers for the games, hinting at this could be a thing. So I've just pulled up another stat here. Talk about revenue. So World of Warcraft revenue. This is let's see the website. So World of Warcraft revenue, they are saying, has over the lifespan between 2004 to 2022 has reached a revenue of over 14 billion. That's that's as of this article was written on February 21st. So let's see here. Estimates World of Warcraft has around 8.5 million monthly players still. This is estimates because Activision Blizzard, the parent company, has never released full active numbers for this. But it's estimated World of Warcraft daily players range from between 700,000 to 1.6 million people a day play it. And I think around a third of players play what is now World of Warcraft Classic. So if you think about World of Warcraft being 20 years old, a lot of the player base really loved the World of Warcraft from 20 years ago. So a number of years, about 4 or 5 years ago, Blizzard released World of Warcraft Classic, which was essentially starting over. Starting from day one, square one, the original look, the original, build of it, go play it. And they're saying of the, odd millions of people that still subscribe to it, a third of them are going back and playing that original content still.
Yeah. That's like going back and watching the original Disney movies or something.
Exactly. It's exactly that. It has branched into all of this. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry, as we've proved.
Well, it's attractive enough for Microsoft to offer $69 billion to buy Activision.
Yeah, exactly. Because of that business.
A software company wanting to diversify into gaming. So.
I mean, I knew that it was becoming serious when Microsoft came out with the Xbox. They're like, we've got to get into this industry. People that started out with software, for computers, and now they're fully invested in video games. From having their own. Yeah, I showed off my Series X. That is Microsoft's latest offering in the gaming console world. To them wanting to buy, publishing companies like Activision Blizzard and just saying, here's a check, fill out a number, essentially. And that deal, I believe, is still going backwards and forwards. But it's creating issues all across the board. But then it leads into what has become content creating side of things. Gamers have seized the opportunity and said, all right, we're streaming our content, we're entertaining, we're producing one-man, one-woman shows, and people are tuning in, watching, investing, and that is becoming a whole new industry as well, from the competitive side all the way through to what I do, which is just the role-playing content creating side. I think it started off more as from the competitive side, watching the tournaments and stuff like that, to those guys then going home and like, how can we continue this revenue stream / high in life that we're writing, excuse me, and turn it into something personal. So you'll see these guys and gals come together as part of teams, compete, and then go back to their own, worlds of what they're doing on their personal sides of things. And then, they're still part of their teams. And in the next tournament, they come back together, whatever location they compete. And then they go back to their, their individual streams and lives. And it's, it's some people's, it's massive, income for them. Like there was a Twitch streamer, which is the platform that most people know, Amazon owned Twitch streamer, that did what we call a subathon. So like a telethon, raise money, but a subathon. So you can subscribe to his channel. Certain benchmarks, they'll do certain things, like, 50,000 subs, they'll do this, whatever. He did, they're saying, just over 300,000 subscribers in a month. And based on the revenue received, you do rough math of the 50-50 split in revenue. It costs $5 to subscribe to a channel on Twitch, and there's a 50-50 split between Twitch and the streamer. Based on that rough math, he did about $750,000 in that 1 month of take-home revenue for him. So it was 1.5-ish in general. He generated in 1 month. Just from that one aspect. And this individual is well known enough in the community that he's obviously diverse into sponsorship deals and things like that. But just in this one source of income, revenue stream, he did $750,000 in a month, which is astronomical. So it's turning into quite a force to be reckoned with in the world. I've got my streaming, I've got, merch store, I've got a YouTube channel, I've got, all these things that all sort of tie into each other and grow as a group. So it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun, and
a long way from that Game Boy.
Yeah, a long way from the Game Boy. Going from, I don't even know what that would have cost.
Well, the power of the Game Boy compared to the power of the setup you've got now, too.
Yeah, I mean, going from whatever that Game Boy was to streamers investing tens of thousands of dollars into their production, because that's, necessary at this point to stay relevant. It just shows the evolution of everything, and how you have to, people expect a quality production. They expect your sound to be crisp. They expect your video to be solid. I remember buying my webcam and initially getting into this, and I had a little, webcam that clipped to the top of my monitor, and, thinking I was, all cool in that. And then I'm watching some Twitch streamer, and his webcam looked so much better than mine. I was like, how is this? I thought I got the cool little webcam thing sitting up there, and started doing research. What do other streamers use as their webcams? And finding out that they use DSLR cameras to do their webcams. So their webcams are 4K DSLR cameras, not a Logitech webcam sitting on top of their screen. I was like, well, all right, rats. How much is this going to cost me? And I use a Sony A6400 as my webcam, and that was like $1,500 when I bought it. And it is what because you did a little bit of photography back in the day. It's a camera like what you would have used essentially back then, and I know nothing about how to use it for that. I couldn't take a picture on this thing to save my life. Couldn't do it. But to wire it up, use it as a webcam, I got you covered. I can do that. So it shows that Sony in their camera industry has evolved into the gaming world and made it a webcam. Obviously, they probably didn't intend for it to be a webcam initially, but it's now in their mindset somewhere that they can broaden their sales base by adding these particular features to it. And so my image that I'm projecting into the podcast is in 4K. Because of it. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to view it in 4K, because they may be on whatever platform or device, and they just simply, that device can't handle 4K, but it is there as an option.
Well, you're talking about technology, David. Another story of history.
Yeah.
My history was when I said got married in '82 and came over to the States permanently, I was very fond of listening to the BBC radio. The BBC has radio as well as television channels, and covers news and current affairs programs and all this kind of stuff. So wanting to keep living in the States and wanting to keep in touch with what was happening in England, the only way we could do that was using a shortwave radio. So we had a Grundig. It was actually digital. We didn't sit turning the dials like a few years earlier. It was actually, you could press a button and program the wavelength you want to listen to, but it was very scratchy. You would tune in and it would be, this is London, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And now, thinking of 30, 40 years later, all we have to do is log on to the BBC online and listen to it as clear as daylight.
Yeah. I remember that. I definitely remember that. You guys having the radios and you guys walking around in the morning, tuning into the BBC, whatever it was. I absolutely remember that. Absolutely.
So to sum up, the what do I think of the streaming or the technology now? Just terribly impressed. First of all, on its economic impact. I mean, it's become major. You can't. It's not a question of ignoring it. It's just there. It's huge and it's growing. And then the final thing that thought I had about it was that, again, I've read articles that are very positive in saying that as a social media aspect of it is much more positive than normal social media.
Yeah.
Because you're leaving out all the people get together on the games and socialize. Yeah. And socialize in a much healthier way, apparently, according to these articles that I've been reading, much healthier than the general getting together on social media platforms. Yeah.
The normal bickering or controversy or anything like that is totally gone by the wayside. It's not brought up. It's seriously, certainly in my circles, seriously frowned upon to talk about anything outside of what we're doing. It's just simply not done. It's just simply not done.
And to be abusive. And so
doesn't exist. And there's serious repercussions across the gaming community for anybody that does that. Yeah.
And consequently, it's a much healthier social medium than you apparently you can tell me they're exchanging general views, not just talking about the game, but other things in general. But it's done in a much more constructive and positive way than else.
I would say it is. There's definitely the element of dark side is definitely there. You every now and then you'll hear a news article about gamer banned for X, Y, and Z, or something about something that they've done in real life crosses over into their gaming community, and people made aware, and then all of a sudden they're essentially, in common terminologies, they're canceled, because of something that they've done. So I now have to be careful that I toe the same line in my reality that I do in my gaming, the same level of professionalism. I find myself every now and then, because I am by no means a large content creator. I have aspirations of getting there, but I have my own niche, and I'm very, proud that I have the viewers that I have, because I remember when I had 3 viewers and it was me watching on my iPad, my laptop, and my iPhone just to try and boost my numbers. And now I've got people that tune in and day out to watch. I have to be careful about what I say in reality. And the easy way for me to manage that is, would I say it to them? If I wouldn't say it to them, I'm not going to say it to you in person. Because if I say it to you in person, it might meet them. Because I've been recognized in public, locally. I've been stopped, and they've said, "Hey, are you that gamer from TikTok or Twitch or whatever it is?" And I was like, "Whoa." That was a big deal for me. I was like, this is getting serious.
Well, apparently across the whole thing, it's a better experience.
Yeah, I would say it absolutely is.
On the platform generally, so.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
I think covers all the topics.
So anything in closing before we go out? I mean, I certainly appreciate you doing it. I know it's something you wake up one day and expect a phone call from your son saying, "Hey, do you want to be on my gaming podcast?" Definitely not something, but
it's been fun because it's made me think and recall how we got started in this and how it's progressed and how it's been very positive. The turnout has been, against all fears, very positive, and actually
turned out all right.
I appreciate the invite and the opportunity.
Thank you. We'll have to do it again at some point.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, thank you.